It was a cold autumn night, at the end of October 2019, when Keanu Reeves entered the lobby of a stylish boutique hotel in Los Angeles. Dressed simply as usual, wearing a black blazer and jeans, he looked like just another ordinary guest arriving after a long day. No one there could have imagined that this calm, discreet man was not just a visitor, but the actual owner of the hotel. Keanu had created the sanctuary for a special purpose, to offer a space where people could feel genuinely welcomed and comforted. However, that night, he was met with anything but hospitality. "Excuse me, sir," called the receptionist, an elegant woman of about 30 named Amanda. "Are you sure you have a reservation?" She crossed her arms, giving Keanu an appraising look. "We don't just let anyone in here, you know." Keanu raised an eyebrow, keeping his composure, though the surprise was evident behind his eyes. "Actually, I do have a reservation," he replied softly, reaching into his pocket for his phone with the confirmation email. Amanda rolled her eyes dramatically and muttered loudly enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "These people think they can just show up in places like this. This isn't some random hostel." Some of the guests in the lobby began to watch the exchange, sensing the tension in the air. Despite a slight trace of hurt crossing his face, Keanu remained calm. He showed the email on his phone, but Amanda barely glanced at it before continuing. "This isn't the kind of place you can book last minute," she said coldly. "We cater to a high-level clientele, celebrities, executives, people who can really pay for it. I suggest you look for a hotel more suitable for you, maybe something across the street." Near the fireplace, a young couple, Emily and David, were unintentionally listening to the conversation. They were celebrating their dating anniversary and enjoying a special night. Emily leaned in discreetly toward David, whispering, "Doesn't he look like Keanu Reeves?" "I think it's him." David narrowed his eyes, trying to be sure. "It can't be. What would he be doing here?" Meanwhile, Amanda went on, completely ignoring the obvious discomfort of the other guests. "Listen," she said, with a tone full of superiority. "We have a reputation to uphold. If you can't afford it, I suggest you look for a motel a bit more in your price range." Keanu finally spoke, his voice remaining steady but now more serious. "Is that how you treat all your guests?" Amanda forced a smile and answered with a hint of sarcasm, "Only those who clearly don't belong here." She picked up the phone, clearly ready to call security, but before she could dial, a deep voice interrupted the situation. James, the hotel manager, had just entered the lobby and noticed what was happening. His face went pale upon recognizing Keanu. "What are you doing?" he asked Amanda, his voice filled with disbelief. Amanda, confused, replied scornfully, "I'm handling the situation. This man clearly has nothing to do with a place like this." James looked at her in shock, then turned to Keanu with an expression that was a mixture of panic and respect. "He's not just a guest," James said, his voice trembling. "Mr. Reeves is the owner of this hotel." An absolute silence fell over the lobby. Amanda froze. All the color drained from her face as she tried to process what she had just heard. Keanu, however, remained serene. He didn't need to say anything at that moment. The revelation of his identity spoke for itself. Emily and David exchanged looks, both surprised and delighted. The night, which had so far been just a normal celebration, turned into an unforgettable memory. Emily whispered to David, "I knew it was him." Amanda, for her part, was visibly shaken. She tried to stammer an apology, but the words wouldn't come easily. Meanwhile, James, the manager, discreetly stepped back, nervous about the unpredictable outcome. Everyone in the lobby watched in absolute silence, sensing the tension in the air. Amanda remained motionless, her face pale and her eyes brimming with tears, burdened with shame and regret. Keanu took a deep breath, keeping his tone calm but with a firmness that conveyed the weight of the moment. He stared into Amanda's eyes with an intense gaze and said, "I believe in kindness. It's the fundamental pillar of this place. Here, everyone should be treated with respect, regardless of appearance or status." Amanda felt the power of Keanu's words. Her lips began to tremble and tears filled her eyes, reflecting the remorse consuming her. With a voice choked with emotion, she managed to say, "Mr. Reeves, I'm so sorry. I was rash, and I acted badly." Keanu did not respond immediately. He looked around, Noticing the faces of the guests who had witnessed every detail of that scene, his eyes rested for a moment on Emily and David, who were still sitting near the fireplace, their expressions a mixture of admiration and empathy. Speaking with heartfelt sincerity, he finally said, "There was a time when I couldn't afford a place like this. There were times I didn't know where I would sleep or where my next meal would come from." There was a pause, and the silence in the room became almost tangible. "That's exactly why I wanted to create this hotel," Keanu continued, his voice catching with emotion. "I wanted it to be a place where anyone could feel welcome, without fear of judgment or rejection." Emily and David, upon hearing these words, exchanged a moved look. They knew Keanu's life story. They knew of the painful losses he had faced, the death of his girlfriend Jennifer Syme and the baby they were expecting, the untimely passing of his best friend River Phoenix, and his sister's long battle with leukemia. But hearing Keanu speak about his own journey, with so much vulnerability, made everything even more real and touching. Amanda, unable to hold back her emotions, began to cry uncontrollably. Tears flowed freely, and she, in an almost inaudible voice, mumbled, "I don't know what came over me. I let my pride and prejudice blind me. Please forgive me." Keanu watched her for a moment, in silence, before giving a slight nod. He did not grant forgiveness right away. Instead, he stated calmly, "Words are easy. What really matters is how we treat people when no one is watching." That phrase hung in the air, prompting everyone present to reflect on their own actions. Amanda, her eyes still wet with tears, understood that true forgiveness would come not just from Keanu's words, but from her own future actions. At that moment, James took a step forward, his expression loaded with shame and determination. "Mr. Reeves," he began, his voice quiet but firm, "I take full responsibility for what happened tonight. This does not represent what we stand for here. I promise changes will be made." Keanu nodded briefly, but his gaze remained fixed on Amanda. "The world needs more kindness," he said, his voice soft but full of meaning. "And that starts with us." From across the lobby, Emily could no longer hold back her tears. She leaned toward David, whispering, "It's amazing how someone who's gone through so much pain can choose kindness, like Keanu does." As Keanu prepared to leave the lobby, a small boy holding his mother's hand approached shyly. He looked no older than 8, and his eyes sparkled with admiration as he gazed at the actor. He hesitated before saying, "Mr. Reeves?" Keanu immediately knelt down to the boy's level. "Hey, champ," he responded with a kind smile. The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper. "My dad and I used to watch your movies before he went to heaven," the boy said, his voice trembling. "He always said you were the nicest person in Hollywood. I think he was right." Keanu was visibly moved as he carefully took the paper. Upon unfolding it, a simple drawing of a superhero was revealed, with a handwritten message at the top. "For Mr. Reeves, the real superhero." Once again, the lobby went silent, but this time out of admiration. Keanu pulled the boy in for a gentle hug. "Your dad must have been an incredible person," he said softly. "Thank you for sharing this with me. It means more than you know." Emily and David discreetly wiped away tears. The anniversary they were celebrating would now be forever etched in their hearts, a lesson on humility, forgiveness, and the transformative power of kindness. When Keanu stood up, he turned to the people in the lobby and said in a firm voice, "This place isn't about luxury or status. It's about people. We should never forget that." Before leaving, Keanu gently touched the boy's shoulder. He reached into his pocket and took out a small keychain he carried with him, a keepsake from one of his film sets. Though worn and scratched, it still shone under the lobby's warm lights. Kneeling once more, he looked into the boy's eyes and said, "Your dad must have been a great man. I want you to have this. It's not much, but maybe it'll remind you that heroes come in all shapes and sizes." The boy accepted the gift with trembling hands and whispered almost inaudibly, "Thank you, Mr. Reeves." Keanu smiled kindly, though the pain in his eyes was evident. He watched the boy and his mother as they left the hotel, the revolving doors closing behind them. From the corner, Emily, still watching, murmured to David, "He carries so much pain it's almost palpable." David nodded and replied, "But look how he turns it into something beautiful." Keanu returned to the reception desk, where Amanda was still standing, visibly shaken. She tried to speak, but Keanu raised his hand, cutting her off. "I'm not interested in apologies," he said, his voice kind but firm. "I'm interested in change." Amanda quickly nodded, tears still rolling down her face. "I promise," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I'll be better. I'll do everything differently." Keanu looked at her for a moment before softening his expression. "We all make mistakes," he said. "What matters is what we do afterwards." Suddenly, a gentle melody began to fill the room. In the far corner of the lobby, an older man around 70 was seated at the grand piano. His fingers moved deftly across the keys, and the music of Claire de Lune filled the space. Keanu turned to watch, and a subtle smile of recognition brightened his face. The man's name tag hanging on his simple uniform identified him as George, a maintenance employee. He was entirely absorbed in the melody, unaware of the impact he was having on everyone around him. Keanu walked over to the piano with a melancholic air and a discreet smile. When George finished the piece, Keanu applauded softly, catching the older man's attention, who looked up in surprise. "That was amazing," Keanu said with his warm voice. "How long have you been playing?" George laughed, scratching the back of his neck. "Oh, longer than I've been fixing pipes." He paused, as if accessing a distant memory. "My wife loved this song. I used to play it for her every night before she passed." Keanu's expression grew even softer at that confession. "She was lucky to have someone who loved her like that," he answered sincerely. George offered a melancholy smile, his eyes reflecting both sadness and gratitude. "I'm the one who was lucky." The silence that followed was heavy and reflective, as if everyone in the lobby felt the weight of that emotional exchange. Keanu placed a hand on George's shoulder and said calmly, "Thank you for sharing that with us." George nodded, his voice quivering with emotion. "Thank you, Mr. Reeves, not just for listening, but for being someone who truly sees people." Keanu stood there, thoughtful for a moment, letting George's words echo in his mind. He looked around the lobby, taking in each face, Amanda still catching her breath, Emily and David sitting together, the boy and his mother outside the glass doors, and George by the piano, his fingers still resting on the keys. For a moment, he felt the weight of everything, the loss, the pain, the love, the hope, almost overwhelm him. But amidst that mix of feelings, there was also a strange and profound beauty. With a voice firm but charged with emotion, Keanu said, "The hardest part of being human is carrying the weight of everything we've lost. But at the same time, that's what makes love so powerful. It's what keeps us standing." Emily, now visibly moved, held David's hand tightly. Their anniversary celebration now took on a much deeper meaning. Across the room, Amanda wiped her eyes, determined never again to make anyone feel invisible. She promised herself she would find a way to rediscover the kindness she had lost somewhere along the way. Keanu was still holding the boy's drawing as he walked toward the elevators. His steps were light and silent, his presence discreet, yet he left behind a transformed atmosphere. When the elevator doors closed, the lobby remained hushed, as if everyone there was connected by an invisible thread of reflection and admiration. Amanda sank into the nearest chair, covering her face with her hands. She had never felt so exposed, so vulnerable. Yet at the same time, something within her was awakening. An old pain she had long ignored was surfacing, and with it, the need to be better. "I need to find the kindness I left behind somewhere in my life," she whispered to herself. By the fireplace, Emily and David remained seated, holding hands in silence. Their hearts were full of conflicting emotions. "Do you think people realize how much he suffered?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. David shook his head. "Probably not. Most just see the famous actor. They don't see the man who had to rebuild himself from the ashes." Meanwhile, Keanu headed up to his private suite. The space was elegantly decorated, every detail carefully chosen to convey comfort and sophistication. However, to him, the surroundings felt cold. He walked slowly to the table, where he placed the boy's drawing. For a long time he stood looking out the window, lost in his thoughts. The boy's words kept echoing in his mind. "My dad said you were the nicest person in Hollywood." Keanu slowly sat down, his hands trembling over the piece of paper. He remembered his own father, a man who abandoned him when he was still a child. All his life, Keanu had tried to fill the void left by that absence. But no matter how far he'd come or how much he'd achieved, that void never fully went away. Then there was Jennifer, his soulmate, the one who should have been there by his side. Keanu let out a slight laugh at the ironies of life, but the pain remained. Jennifer was not just a distant memory, but a constant absence he carried with him. Though the wound had never completely healed, he found strength to honor the love they had shared, keeping her memory alive in everything he did. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Come in," he called, his voice husky with suppressed emotion. James, the manager, entered with a concerned, hesitant expression. "Mr. Reeves, I just wanted to see how you are. I know the night was intense." Keanu smiled faintly. "It's all right, James, I'm fine." But James seemed unconvinced. He hesitated for a moment before continuing. "You know, when we started this hotel, you told me something I never forgot. You said people don't come to places like this just for the rooms or the amenities. They come because they're looking for a connection, a moment that reminds them life is worth living." Keanu nodded slowly, his gaze distant, as if he were revisiting that moment in his mind. James went on, his voice calm. "I think tonight you gave exactly that to everyone here, a moment they'll carry with them, including Amanda." Amanda's name brought a brief smile to Keanu's face. "I hope she truly took it to heart," he replied. James moved closer, his expression serious but filled with respect. "Keanu, you're more than the owner of this place. You're its heart. Whether you realize it or not, you're offering people something they take with them even after they leave." Keanu remained silent for a moment, his throat tight with an emotion he couldn't express in words. "Sometimes I wonder if I still have anything to give," he said, almost in a whisper. James shook his head firmly. "You have more to give than most people ever will, because you understand what loss is. You've lived it and managed to turn that pain into something that heals others." Keanu did not reply, but the silence between them conveyed more meaning than any words could. Later that same night, when the hotel was finally quiet and the city lights glowed softly outside, Keanu sat at the table. Before him lay the drawing the boy had given him. He picked up a pen and on the back of the paper wrote a simple message. "You reminded me that heroes come in all shapes and sizes. Thank you for being my hero tonight." He folded the paper carefully, placed it in an envelope, and the following morning left it at reception, requesting that it be given to the boy before he and his mother left. A short time later, Amanda arrived for work earlier than usual. Her eyes were red, betraying a sleepless night filled with reflection. James waited for her with a cup of hot coffee. "You're early," he remarked, handing her the cup. Amanda nodded, her voice still shaky. "I want a fresh start. I need a fresh start." James watched her for a moment, then offered her an encouraging smile. "Then let's make it count." Amanda picked up the envelope with Keanu's message and headed behind the counter. Soon the lobby began to fill with the bustle of morning. Some guests hurried past on their way to appointments, while others leisurely enjoyed breakfast. Amid the bustle, Amanda spotted the boy and his mother walking toward the doors. The boy was holding the envelope carefully, his face lit with genuine joy. Suddenly he stopped, turned, and looked for Amanda with his eyes. When he found her, he waved at her with a small gesture, but one laden with meaning. Amanda felt a lump in her throat and waved back, trying to hold back a tear that escaped down her cheek. In that moment, she understood something profound. It wasn't just Keanu who had given the boy a gift. The child, with his innocence and kindness, offered them all a chance to be better. Meanwhile, upstairs in his private suite, Keanu watched the city come to life through the window. The boy's words and drawing were still fresh in his mind, forever etched in his heart. He saw the boy and his mother leave the hotel. Under the golden glow of the morning sun, they crossed the street, the boy holding the envelope like a precious treasure. "I told you, Mom," he said, his voice filled with awe. "He's a real superhero." Inside the hotel, Amanda discreetly wiped her tears and returned to work. There was now a quiet resolve in her actions, a desire to embody the kindness that Keanu had shown her, even when she didn't deserve it. James, watching from a distance, noticed the change in Amanda. He saw how she greeted the guests in a warmer, more human tone, and he knew that, in some way, Keanu's words had taken root. Keanu stood by the window, observing the city stretched out before him, the streets busy and full of life. He kept his eyes on the boy and his mother until they disappeared into the crowd. He felt a heaviness in his chest, but for the first time in weeks, a fleeting sense of peace enveloped him. The boy's drawing and the shaky words, written in a child's handwriting, "For Mr. Reeves, the real superhero," were still vivid in his mind. It wasn't the first time someone had called him a hero. Fans often mentioned that they were inspired by his films or by stories of his quiet generosity. However, hearing it from a child, a boy who had lost his father, touched him differently. It reminded him of his own pain, of times when he too desperately needed someone to believe in him. He remembered how much it hurt not to have that presence. Keanu exhaled deeply, feeling the weight of the past pressing on him like an old wound that never fully healed. He thought of Jennifer, of her laughter and the dreams they had shared, of the life they should have had together. He thought of his sister who had bravely fought leukemia and the helplessness he felt watching her suffer. Despite all the losses, he was still there, standing, trying. With calm steps, Keanu walked over to the small safe in the corner of the suite and opened it. Inside was a collection of precious mementos, a photo of Jennifer, a bracelet his sister had given him, and a worn copy of a book his late friend River Phoenix had loved. Carefully, he placed the boy's drawing between the pages of the book, as though safeguarding it alongside those memories that meant so much to him. As he closed the safe, his phone vibrated. It was a message from James. "Thank you for last night. You reminded us why we're here. Amanda wanted me to tell you she's ready to change. I think we all are." Keanu smiled faintly and replied, "Small acts of kindness create ripples. Let's keep going." Later, as he prepared to leave the hotel, Keanu made one last stop in the lobby. The staff had gathered to see him off. There was something different in the air, a mixture of respect, gratitude, and admiration. Amanda stepped forward, visibly nervous, her hands clasped in front of her body. "Mr. Reeves," she began, her voice trembling but laden with sincerity, "I want to thank you, not just for last night, but for giving me a second chance. I promise I'll do my best." Keanu regarded her for a moment before replying gently, "It's not about being perfect. It's about being better than we were yesterday. Keep trying." With those words, he said his farewells and left the hotel. The crisp autumn air enveloped him as soon as he stepped out onto the Los Angeles streets, alive with energy and motion. For a moment, he felt like just another person among many, a feeling he welcomed with relief. As he walked, Keanu pulled out his phone, opened the Notes app and typed a few words. Then he put the device away again. Sometimes, it's the smallest moments that remind us of the greatest truths. Kindness transforms, love heals. And even in the darkest times we can be someone's light. Keanu kept walking, blending into the city crowd. The boy's drawing and the words remained with him, a reminder that true heroes aren't just on the screen. They exist in small acts of love and kindness, connecting one soul to another. And perhaps after so much loss, he finally realized that he hadn't lost the ability to keep giving and loving. Sometimes that was enough.